Welcome to this session on meaningful assessment strategies in physical education as part of the PHE Canada National Conference for 2022. My name's Nathan Horn. Today I'm joining you from British Columbia, Canada, and I can't wait to get started as we dive into assessment. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I reside in the traditional unceded territory of the Katzie, Kwantlen, and Stolo nations. I express my gratitude and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and value the opportunity to live, play, learn, and share educational experiences from their traditional territory. In today's workshop, we'll start with an introduction, a little bit about me, my background, and what I do as an educator. We'll dive into pedagogy of assessment, linking assessment to physical literacy, assessing movement competency, assessing game performance, assessing behavior and engagement, and at the end I'll share some resources and tools that you can take and use in your practice. So, as I mentioned, my name's Nathan Horn. I'm currently based in Maple Ridge, British Columbia, where I am the Physical and Health Education Department Head at Meadow School. We are a JK to grade 12 independent school with about 670 students on a beautiful campus just outside Vancouver. But perhaps you can tell by my accent, I am not originally from Canada. I actually grew up in Australia before moving to a few different countries around the world and teaching in a variety of different places. I'll explain a little bit about that later. I am a graduate of Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador. I recently completed my Master of Physical Education through Memorial University Online. I'm also the founder of iPhys-Ed.com, the Phys-Ed-Cast podcast, and the Phys-Ed Library. This is my family, my wife, my beautiful two girls, and they are absolutely my inspiration and my whole life. And so my two daughters and my wife is also an educator as well as a school counselor, and my two girls love getting outside and being active as we explore the beautiful different parts of British Columbia. So as I mentioned, I grew up in Australia. I grew up in Tasmania, about as far from Canada as you can get. You can see the map there in the bottom left corner. It's the small island to the south of the mainland of Australia. A lot of people actually consider Tasmania to be like the Newfoundland of Australia, so it is quite appropriate that I did actually complete my master's degree at the university, Memorial University in Newfoundland and Labrador. So I grew up in Hobart, Tasmania, in a very sporting and active family, and I loved sports and I loved any opportunity to get out and be physically active. I completed my undergraduate degree, my teaching degree, a Bachelor of Human Movement at the University of Tasmania, and shortly after completing that degree, I moved overseas to the United Kingdom. I spent a number of years in the UK, as well as Cambodia, Italy, Singapore, and now Canada. And for the past 5 years, I have been living here in beautiful Maple Ridge and working at this amazing school. You can see our campus here and the beautiful environment that surrounds it. Part of the forest to the north of the school there is actually part of the school grounds. We have a number of trails through the forest and through the school, which make our school a fantastic place to teach physical education. You can see some of our facilities and places that we have available to us for our students to be able to be physically active. So I feel super lucky to be working in a school that is so well equipped to be able to deliver such quality physical education experiences to our students. And I work with a fantastic team of physical educators who every day bring amazing opportunities for our students to be active and get outdoors and enjoy the capabilities of their bodies. As I mentioned, I also am the founder of iPhys-Ed.com, a website that's dedicated to quality physical education resources, which can help you improve your practice. If you haven't had a chance to go and check out the website, please head over to iPhys-Ed.com. You can see the link there at the bottom right of the screen, and you'll be able to find a lot of the resources that I'm going to talk about today as a part of that website. It was really started as a way for me to reflect upon my teaching practice and has evolved into a fantastic resource for physical education teachers. I also have a podcast called the Phys-Ed-Cast, where I interview leaders in the world of physical education, sport, coaching, and I try to get episodes out on that monthly if possible. I interviewed PHE Canada's head honcho there, Dr. Doug Gleddy, a little while back, but I have a number of different episodes from teachers all around the world. So if you're into podcasts, you have a commute, and that's something that you're interested in listening to, then please go out and check out the Phys-Ed-Cast on any of the podcast providers that you listen to. And finally, I have the Phys-Ed library, which I have also created, which houses a number of online courses, resources, games, assessment tools. A lot of the things that I'm going to show you today are housed in the Phys-Ed library, and you can go and access those by going to library.iPhys-Ed.com. So let's dive into assessment. I've talked a little bit about me and my background, but the reason you're here today is because you are interested in thinking about ways that you can improve your assessment practice. So I think before we do get started, it's really important to consider what assessment is. Assessment essentially is an educational process for the purpose of improving student learning. So anything that we are doing as an educator, as part of our process of teaching, is designed to help our students improve their learning. So assessment doesn't have to be this scary thing, this dirty word. Assessment really is everything that we do as educators. And we know from research that compared with other subjects, physical education has traditionally been a relatively data-poor environment. And this is not at all due to the lack of learning that's taking place in PE, quite the opposite. But it is the absence of effective strategies for capturing what learning has actually taken place. So as a profession, we're doing some amazing things. However, the way that we've been going about trying to assess and prove the learning that's taken place hasn't been as effective as it might be. And I hope to provide you with a few examples and some tools that I've used in my practice that can help try to shift this away from that data-poor environment to a very data-rich environment. So as you work your way through this webinar, I know it's virtual and you don't have the opportunity to be able to ask questions live as the webinar is happening. But maybe just think about these questions as you go through. Even think about these questions now. So in your practice, in your school, with your students, what is it that you assess? What things are you assessing your students on? How do you assess these things? What is the process of assessment that you go through? When do you assess your students? How often do you assess your students? Is it only when report cards come around? Is it every week, every month? When do those assessments take place within your teaching? And then why do you assess the things that you assess? So if you're assessing movement, or you're assessing fitness, or you're assessing capability in games, why do you choose to assess those things? Is it because you think that's the right thing to do? Is it because you're mandated to do those things? Why do you assess the things that you assess? And then the big question, how do you grade? So once you've done your assessments, how does that inform your final grades or your term grades or your report cards? So these questions are just questions to keep in the front of your mind as we go through the rest of this webinar, and they may prompt you or provoke you to think of some ways that you might go about changing maybe what you assess or how you assess or when you assess or why you assess the things that you do. So we're talking about assessment. There are three main types of assessment. There's assessment of learning, assessment as learning, and assessment for learning. Assessment of learning is typically done by the teacher, and it's done to determine an achievement level. And this is where the evidence to support grading typically comes in. So most of the assessment that most teachers do is assessment of learning. We also have assessment as learning, and this is more done by the student. It's the self-assessment and provides feedback to the student upon how they're doing. So when they actually perform a skill, in their mind, they're thinking, how did I do in that? Could I have done better? Did it go well? Did it not go well? So that's assessment as learning. The type of assessment that I think we really need to focus a lot more on is assessment for learning. And this is done in collaboration and in partnership between teachers and students. It helps us determine, as teachers, as well as students, what the next steps are. So as a teacher, when I'm working together with a student and assessing them for learning, we're working together to work out what are the next steps that we need to take to move that student forward. What are the next things I need to do as a teacher to plan my lesson to make sure that learning's happening? Provides feedback not only for me, but for the student. And it's a continuous process. It's ongoing. So if we think of assessment of learning as being those sort of summative end of unit assessment tasks, assessment as learning being a student's experience of being in physical education class and doing things. And then assessment for learning being good teaching practice where we're working together with the students to determine the next steps to help them move forward and deepen their knowledge, deepen their understanding, deepen their skills, and that this process is happening all the time, and most of the time you don't even realize that it's happening. We also know that within physical education, factors that are not directly related to learning, things like dressing out in the right uniform, a student's effort, a student's participation in class, are often included in the calculation of the final grade. And I believe this practice is problematic because while those aspects are necessary for student learning to take place, they're not related to the knowledge and skills designated by learning standards that students should learn in physical education. So if you're looking at your curriculum, a lot of curriculums are not talking about whether a student is wearing their uniform or not, or whether a student is participating to the fullest of their ability, or how much effort that they're putting in. But you hear stories of teachers who assess students and take marks away from them if they forget their kit, or if they're not participating in a certain lesson, they lose a point, and after losing so many points, it diminishes their ability to be able to get a certain grade. So this is really, really problematic practice. When we're assessing students, we shouldn't be assessing them on these things. We should be assessing them based upon their knowledge, their skills, and directly against the curriculum and the learning standards at which the students are learning. So grading, which is what our students, any student, what grade did I get? When we're grading students, this needs to be linked to learning goals. You need to create outcomes that align with your teaching standards, that align with your curriculum. It should sample student performance. It shouldn't be a one-off. It should be a student's performance over time. And we need to provide students with information about the assessments. Assessments should never be a surprise for students. We should provide them with all of the tools and all of the things that they need to be able to be successful within those assessments. So, having said that, what should we assess as physical educators? I think we need to make sure that we are assessing all of these things. And we've probably done a decent job as a profession over the past number of years in assessing the skills of our students. Perhaps we haven't done such a great job at assessing knowledge, and even more so understanding. The Quality Physical Education Guidelines from UNESCO and the Declaration of Berlin in 2013 state that physical education is the most effective means of providing all children and youth with the skills, attitudes, values, knowledge, and understanding for lifelong participation in society. This is my favorite quote because it shows that physical education is the most effective means of developing good citizens, good human beings who are able to participate in their communities. Physical education isn't necessarily about creating fantastic athletes. But UNESCO has told us through the Declaration of Berlin that physical education is the most effective means of providing our young people with all the skills and attitudes and values and knowledge they need to live happy and healthy lives. If you ever need a piece of advocacy, if you ever need something to talk about the value of physical education, this is the quote that you need to refer to. If you dive further into the Quality Physical Education Guidelines, you'll hear about physical activity, sport, quality physical education, the difference between those things. Physical activity is any bodily movement that exerts energy. Sport can be organized, it can be recreational, it's people playing together or playing within a set of rules. And quality physical education should be planned, purposeful, inclusive, and linked to curriculum. You'll also hear the term physical literacy. Now, physical literacy is the foundation of physical education. It's not a program, it's not a physical literacy program, it's an outcome of any structured physical education provision. And physical literacy can be best achieved more readily if learners encounter a range of age and stage appropriate opportunities. Quality physical education should enable children and young people to become physically literate. So if that's our outcome, that's our end goal, how do we link assessment to that? If that's what we're aiming towards, how can we assess students on their physical literacy if it's not a program, but it's an outcome? Now, if you look at Canada's Physical Literacy Consensus Statement from June 2015, you'll see that there are 4 elements of physical literacy. Motivation and confidence within the affective domain, physical competence within the physical domain, knowledge and understanding within the cognitive domain, and engagement in physical activities for life within the behavioral domain. So if we think about these 4 elements, through these 4 elements, and assessing these 4 elements, we can develop a picture of a student's physical literacy. We can understand their physical ability, their cognitive ability, their motivation, their confidence, and their likelihood to want to engage in physical activities for life. So when we're thinking about assessment, we want to think about what are some ways that we can assess all 4 of those domains. And through the next part of this webinar, I want to take you through some tools that I've used to help me assess my students against these 4 domains. So let's get started with motivation and confidence, the affective domain. Canadian Sport for Life and the Play tools, you may have seen this tool before, but this is a fantastic tool that helps get a better understanding of your students' motivation and confidence. What motivates them to participate in PE? How confident do they feel? So if you look at this assessment, it's asking a number of things. How good are you at doing different types of sports and activities in multiple environments, in the gym, the water, ice, snow, outdoors, on the playground? What do you think about doing sports and activities? Are you good at things? Does your body allow you to participate? Do you worry about trying sport and physical activity? And then finally, how important physical activity is in comparison to things like reading and writing and math and numbers, and how much that's valued within your school, within your family, and with your friends. So this assessment tool can be done by students, can be done within a class, and I've done this with my students in the past a number of times, and it's a really great tool to help get a better understanding of their confidence and what motivates them to be physically active. So the last time that I did this with my students, here's some of the data that I was able to collect through doing this. So not only was I able to collect data on an individual basis, but it enabled me to collect data across my entire school or my entire PE program. And what I found out was that 70% of my students felt they had enough skills to participate in sport and physical activities. And that was a really big win for me, that 70% of my students felt confident enough that they had the skills to be able to do whatever it is that we asked them to do in physical education. And obviously there's 30% that don't, but 70% is a pretty big win. 80% of students understood the words that teachers and coaches used in lessons. Now, when I completed this survey, this was in a school that was international and had a number of students, nearly all the students, that English was their second language. So again, another really big win, that my students knew the types of terms and things that I was talking about as a teacher. And that 77% of students felt confident when they were doing physical activities. So those were the wins. That's what I found from doing this that was working really well in my program. However, on the other side, I discovered that 37% of students worried about trying a new sport or physical activity. 29% of students thought their body didn't allow them to participate in the types of activities that they wanted to. And really concerning for me that 51% of my students didn't feel confident in and on the water, even though we had a swimming program as part of the school's PE offering. So again, by doing this, I was able to collect some data on an individual basis about individual students, as well as look at the data as a whole and pull out some trends and some things that we could work on as a PE department to help improve our physical education program. So this tool is a fantastic tool, readily available on the Canadian Sport for Life website. You can download this as well as the other play tools and start using them with your students. So if we're linking physical literacy and assessment together, we've talked about motivation and confidence in that affective domain. Let's dive a little bit into physical competence. So if we're linking physical competence to physical literacy, we're really talking about 3 main things. We're talking about locomotor skills, having students be able to, move well, manipulative skills, being able to use equipment, and then stability, being able to control their body in space. So for me, I think there are 18 main skills that I like to focus on with my students. For locomotor, we're looking at run, skip, gallop, side shuffle, hop, and leap. Manipulative, we're looking at throwing, catching, rolling, kicking, striking, and dribbling with hands and feet. And then stability, we're looking at static balance, balancing while being still, dynamic balance while moving, jumping vertically, horizontally, landing safely, and being able to transfer weight. So one tool that I developed to help me assess my students was the Movement Skills Assessment Toolkit. And within this toolkit, there are a number of tools that I use to assess my students' movement competency. It starts with fundamental movement skill cards that students can use and I can use as a teacher. I have a quick look movement assessment, group assessment tools that I use to assess my students' movement ability. So The first thing that I do when I'm assessing my students' movement is what I call a quick look movement assessment. Now, this is designed to give me a really quick idea of which students are doing well and which students need improvement. And again, it could be helping me to get a better understanding of any movement gaps within an individual student, or even as a class, or even as a grade level, where there's maybe certain skills that more than one or two students are having difficulty in. So the way I do this is I use this quick look movement assessment, and there are 3 levels to it. So a student is either classified as emerging, where they're beginning to develop the skills of that movement. However, it doesn't quite sort of look right, or they're not able to do it correctly. A recognized skill, where the student can perform the skill and you can see them that they do it correctly. It looks right when they do it. And then a proficient level, which is a student who is very, very capable in that skill and balanced, and can do the skill at speed and can do the skill consistently without making errors. So what I'm doing is, as I'm observing my students, and this could take place over a number of lessons, is just making notes on which students are emerging, which students are recognized, and which students are proficient. So I write the students' names down the side of the sheet there, and then just put marks for each of the skills, whether they're emerging, recognized, or proficient. Now, if I'm noticing the student is having difficulty in a number of different movement skills, then that could be a sign for intervention. If it's only 1 or 2, then I know that they just need a little bit extra help in a certain area. Another way of using this to make it even quicker is to only mark students who are emerging. So I'm just putting E's for students in the skills that they're having difficulty with, and I'm not too worried about recognized and proficient, and that just enables me to know that these are the students that need a little bit of extra help. So I want to give you guys a chance to do this. So I know you don't have this tool in front of you, but just do it either in your head, or if you have a piece of paper there, write it down. But we're going to watch a video here, and I'm going to ask you to assess some of my students in their movement skills. So these are some elementary students, and they're going to perform a few different skills for you. And then I want you to sort of just make a mark in your head or on a piece of paper if you have it, and let me know whether you think they are emerging, recognized, or proficient in the skill. So this is student 1, and she is running. So looking at that skill, would you say that it is an emerging skill, a recognized skill, or a proficient skill? Can she run, and does it look right? Is it emerging, recognized, or proficient? I would probably assess this student as a recognized run. I think she can run. I can tell that she's running. She has some errors in her running, something that she can work on, but she is not emerging. She can run. If I ask her to run, she can run. Let's look at her skipping. How would you assess the student on their skipping? I would assess this student as emerging on her skipping. If I asked her to skip, or if I saw her doing that movement, it's not immediately obvious to me that what she's doing is skipping. So she's emerging as a skipper. Next, we'll look at sidestepping or shuffling, sliding. How would you assess this student on their sliding or their sidestepping or shuffling? I would assess this student as recognized. She had a little difficulty on the way across, but on the way back, she was able to do it quite well. I don't think she's emerging. I can tell that she's side shuffling and sliding, so recognized for this student. Galloping. Again, this student, I believe, is recognized for galloping. Let's look at student number 2. Okay, student number 2 for running. How would you assess them? Emerging, recognized, proficient? This student is definitely recognized, and probably for his age going towards a proficient level. Skipping. I would say this student is probably proficient in skipping. Not super balanced in his sliding, so recognized for sure. Galloping, recognized. And hopping, recognized. So hopefully you can see with this tool, it's a really quick and easy way to get a picture of which students are capable in which skills and which skills students may need a little bit of extra help in. We're not looking for all of the different indicators of success within those movements. We're just simply looking to see, can they do the skill and does it look right? And if they can do it and it sort of looks right, then that's the limit of this assessment. If we want to assess them a little bit further, then we can move and use a tool like our fundamental movement skill cards. So these skill cards, there are 18 of them for the 18 skills that I mentioned earlier. On the front of the cards, they have verbal prompts. So for running, things like look ahead, high knees, pump your arms, have light feet, and lean forward. And on the back of the card, they have success criteria. So specific things that you're looking for to help a student be proficient in this skill. So eyes forward, focus throughout the run, knees bending at right angles during the recovery phase, arms bending at elbows and moving in opposition to the legs, the front part of the foot contacting the ground, and the body leaning slightly forward. These cards are fantastic. I printed them out. I used them with my students. I laminated them, and I use them as a peer assessment tool. So I'll give this to a group of kids, and one student will be the coach, and they will use the verbal prompts on the front to help the students understand how to improve their movement skill. And at the same time, they will use a whiteboard marker to check off the success criteria on the back. And then they'll swap with their partner. The partner will do the same thing. And it's a really fantastic way to get students to understand the language, the success criteria, and to help them improve their movement skills. So these fundamental movement skill cards are a fantastic resource that you can use to not only assess as a teacher, but have your students peer assess each other as well. If you're interested in accessing these, you can go to iPhys-Ed.com/FMS to access these fundamental movement skill cards. And if you're looking for the Movement Skill Assessment Toolkit, which contains the fundamental movement skill cards, as well as the Quick Look Movement Assessment and a number of other assessment templates and tools, you can get the assessment toolkit at iPhys-Ed.com/move. All right, so we've talked a little bit about motivation and confidence. We've talked about physical competence. We're going to move into knowledge and understanding in the cognitive domain. We know through research as well that the assessment of games and sports in physical education has often not been authentic. And as teachers, we often make assumptions about a student's performance. We need to make sure that these assumptions are authenticated with authentic evidence of student learning. So when we're watching a game being played and a student we perceived to be dominating the game, we need to make sure that those assumptions are authenticated with some data, or a student who's having difficulty, that's also authenticated with some data as well. Because too often we attempt to measure competence in games through skills tests. And when we do that, we create contexts that mitigate against student success, no matter how much effort they exert. So simply asking a student to perform a set of skills out of the context of a game isn't setting them up for success when they get into that game situation. So how can we do this? If we think about a game, so for example, a 5-on-5 soccer game, if we're only assessing skills, a student may only be in possession of the ball for 3 minutes out of the 30 minutes that they are taking part in a game of 5-on-5 soccer. So if we're assessing simply based upon their skill and their ability to, pass the ball or score with the ball, or dribble the ball, we're only using 3 minutes out of 27 minutes of them participating in that game. So we need to make sure that when we're assessing not only their skill and when they have the ball, but when they also don't have the ball and what they're doing during those other 27 minutes. So we can use the game sense approach to help us link that assessment to the knowledge and understanding piece. And we know through game sense that game sense is decision making and movement knowledge, which equals movement capability. So if a student knows what to do and they know how to do it, then they should be able to do it. And this is where we see things fall down sometimes. We have students who know what to do, but maybe don't have the movement knowledge or the skills to be able to actually execute. Or on the other hand, we have students who are highly skilled and have all of the movement knowledge and skills to be successful, but their decision making isn't maybe as good as it could be. So for us to have a really good picture of a student's ability within a game, we need to make sure that we are assessing not only their decision making, but also their movement knowledge. One of the tools that I've used to do that is what I call a heat map, or a heat tracking of player movement. Now, this is a really simple tool, again, that can be used as a teacher tool, or it can be used as a peer assessment tool. It works really, really well as a peer assessment tool, where you have one student track another student's movement around a playing space simply by drawing a line on the paper as the player moves around the space. So you could just have a single line that shows where the player moves. You could use different types of lines to show different types of movement. So, a straight line for running, a dash line for when the student's in possession of the ball, a number of different things. But essentially what you're trying to do is build a picture and build some data around how the player is moving within the space. So one student will assess the other student when they're playing, and then they'll swap. So the student that's playing will come out of the game, the students that are assessing will go in. And as they swap, there are a couple of questions there at the bottom. So it can sort of guide some conversation or some reflection upon performance. So where in the playing space did the player do most of their work? Were they attacking? Were they defensive? Were they moving all over? Did they move a lot? Did they not move very much? How did they use the space on the court? And then what conclusions might be drawn about the player's involvement in the game based upon what you can see. So it encourages a conversation between player and observer and enables opportunity for reflection. Another tool that's really similar is also a pass map. So you could create a pass map. So again, putting a mark on the playing space where a player receives the ball, and then an arrow or a line showing where they pass it. And again, at the end of the arrow, you could put things like an arrowhead to show a successful pass. You could put a straight line to show an unsuccessful pass where there's been maybe a turnover, or even a circle at the end of the line to show that that player has taken a shot at the goal and scored. And then again, same thing. Where did the player do their work? How did they use the space? And what conclusions might they draw? Were they passing long passes, short passes? Were they passing forward? Were they passing backwards? Where in the space were they able to gain possession of the object? Were they attacking? Were they defensive? So using a tool like this, you're able to collect so much visual information that enables you as a teacher and also the student to have an opportunity to reflect upon their performance rather than them just stepping out of the game and you making an assumption about their performance, or them saying, yeah, I did really well and I felt like I did really well in this game, or I didn't do very well in this game, without having any data to back that up. So using a tool like this enables you to have that data and the students to be able to visually see how they've done in the game, and maybe how they can improve when they go back into the game again. Another two tools that you can use to help assess knowledge and understanding are things like the Game Performance Assessment instrument, which measures game performance behaviors, and the Team Sport Assessment Procedure, which quantifies an individual's overall offensive performance in a team invasion game. So if looking at something like a Game Performance Assessment instrument, you can assess a number of different things. You could assess their base skills, their decision-making, skill execution, their ability to support, their ability to guard and mark, to cover and adjust. This example that you can see on the right is a Game Performance Assessment instrument that is assessing decision-making and skill execution. So it's assessing a student's ability to make appropriate decisions about what to do with the ball, as well as their efficient execution of those selected skills. In the middle of the page, you can see a space for players' names, so you could assess multiple players here or just one, and then some columns for decision-making and skill execution. So for decision-making, you can see a green column that says A for appropriate, or IA in the red column for inappropriate. So when you're observing the student or their peer observing, you can have a student make a tally mark in either of those columns every time a student makes a decision about what to do with the ball. So if you feel that their decision was an appropriate decision, you put it in the green column, or if you feel they made not such a great decision, you can put it in the inappropriate column. And then the same thing for skill execution. So every time the player gets the ball, you're making a tally in the decision-making column and the skill execution column and saying whether it was an appropriate or inappropriate decision or an effective or ineffective execution of skill. At the end of a certain amount of time, say 5 to 8 minutes of play, you're going to total up those columns, and then you can use some of the formulas below to calculate things like a decision-making index or a skill execution index or a game performance index or an overall game involvement. And again, this data can help inform students and provide feedback upon their performance in a game and how appropriate their decision-making was or inappropriate, and then how effective they were in their skill execution. So you may see a student who is making really, really good decisions, but not executing the skills well, or they're executing the skills well, but their decision making maybe leaves a little bit to be desired. So again, another tool that you can use, maybe not as easy as the other tools, and this one's probably better as a teacher tool to begin with, but a great tool to get a better idea of your students' performance. And there's so much research out there that you can find about game performance assessment instruments and different versions that you can use and access. You can see there the tally marks and sort of how it goes together. So we can see the decision-making index is 0.75, so they were 75% effective in their decision-making, 0.6 or 60% effective in their skill execution. Their overall game performance was 67.5%, and they were involved in the game 9 times. The team sport assessment protocol is very, very similar, a little bit more detail here. Essentially what you're looking at is, how did a player get the ball? So did they receive it by conquering it or by intercepting it or taking it away from the other team? Or did they just receive the ball from a teammate? So again, you're making a tally in one of those two boxes based upon how they got the ball. And then how did they dispose of the ball? How did they get rid of the ball? So did they lose it? Did they turn it over to the other team? Was it a neutral ball, a pass that was sort of, not attacking? It was sort of sideways or backwards. Was it an attacking pass that put their team into a more attacking position, or an offensive ball? Or was it a successful shot? Did they take a shot and actually score? And again, by adding the tally marks here, you can use the data analysis tools at the bottom there to get an idea of how attacking they were, how much of the ball that they had, and how efficient they were overall. So in this case, you can see the student was 0.45 in their efficiency, and the overall performance score was 7 out of a maximum of 30. Another great tool that you can use is I put together a Google form that used some of the videos from this. A great video from Dr. Jamie Mandigo around assessment strategies for invasion games and some different scenarios. So the students had access to the Google form, and they were watching snippets from the video around different tactical concepts in invasion games. So for example, there are 3 different options here in this maintaining possession. Now, if you go to that link there, iPhys-Ed.com/main, you can see an example of this assessment tool. And what the students do is they look at these 3 videos, option A, option B, option C, and they choose which is the best strategy for keeping possession of the ball. They choose option A, B, or C, and then they give an answer Y. So again, this is a really quick way to get an idea of your students' knowledge and understanding of different strategies within games. And I've had students do this while they're rotated out of playing, using an iPad, quickly filling this in. And then as the teacher, I can see their answers on my iPad, on my computer. And then I can have conversations with students before they go back into the game. So if they've told me, I think this because option B because of this, and that's not a correct answer, then I can sort of have a conversation with them and say, well, why did you choose that? And, did you consider option A or option B or option C for these reasons? And then they go back into the game and they have that knowledge. So again, another quick assessment that you can use to get a better understanding of your students' understanding of what to do in different situations within different invasion games. All right, so we've covered off motivation and confidence. We've covered off physical competence and now knowledge and understanding. The last area of physical literacy that we want to think about ways that we can assess is in our engagement in physical activities for life, so that behavioral domain. So we know through the physical literacy cycle that essentially, we want any physical activity experience to be fun. But for me, I think fun is that area between success and failure. If something's too easy or something's too hard, it's not fun. So we want to find that just right challenge level that enables students to be successful some of the time, but also experience failure. And that's where I believe fun lives. We know if things are fun for students, that's going to help them develop their confidence. And the more confident they are, the more motivated they are to want to participate. The more motivated they are, the more that they're going to participate. And the more they participate, the more likely they are to develop their competence. So this ongoing cycle. If we think about competence and motivation, we know that for motivation, there are three main things. There's the feeling of autonomy, feeling of competence, and the feeling of relatedness. So in terms of autonomy, it's that student's ability to be able to, self-initiate, just get started themselves and regulate their own behavior. Their competence is their ability to interact within the environment, within the game, within the physical activity experience that they're taking place in. And then their relatedness, they need to feel close or belonging to a social group. So for a student to feel motivated to want to participate in physical activity, we need to make sure that we're considering all these things about how they can, regulate their own behavior, how they interact with the environment, and then how they feel that they belong to the social group within which they're participating. So there is a tool that I adapted from Gill, Gross, and Huddleston that I call the Participation Motivation Questionnaire, that I've used with my students to get a better idea of what motivates them to be physically active. And this came out of a class that I had a really, really difficult time motivating. It didn't seem to matter what I did or how I did it. They just never really were that keen to be physically active. I just couldn't find anything to motivate them. And so I used this tool to get a better idea of what it was that motivated them as a class. Now, through using this tool, students answer the questions that they can see on the left there, and they tell me whether it's very important to them, it's somewhat important, or it's not important at all. So things like, do you want to improve your skills? Are you active because you like to play sport, or you like to stay in shape, or you like to get rewards, or you like to be competitive, or you like to be part of a team? And essentially, all of these questions can be categorized into a number of different things. So it can be about fitness, about developing skills and getting better, participating for fun, participating because they want to feel affiliated or a part of something. They participate because they want to be recognized, because they like being part of a team, or that there's an element of ego or competitiveness about them. So through completing this, I was able to find out that individual class in particular that I was having a lot of difficulty with, really said that it was important to them that they got rewarded. They like to be active and be rewarded for being active. So that enabled me to build some reward system into my class and into the way that I taught, so that they were rewarded the more and the better that they were participating in physical activity. And this is something that I don't typically do in my teaching. But had I not completed this questionnaire with the students, I wouldn't have known that a lot of them valued that as a reason why they were physically active. Other classes I've done it with, they say that a lot of students saying that they want to be physically active because they want to stay in shape, or they want to, be with their friends. And again, that helps me as a teacher to understand better how I can provide them with physical activity experiences and physical education experiences that are going to help them, be more motivated to engage in physical activities outside of the physical education environment. If we're thinking about behavioral as well, behavior, and especially for younger students, is sometimes an issue. So how do we assess that behavior? How do we collect some data that helps us to have those conversations with parents about ways that, students maybe could improve their behavior, or can improve their ability to engage in physical activities in a safe and enjoyable way for everybody? So if we look at this template that I adapted from Don Hellison's Teaching Personal and Social Responsibility, it's looking at a few different areas: respect, participation, effort, self-direction, and caring. You can see some examples of what those different categories are. So for example, respect: a student does no harm to others verbally or physically, includes and works well with others, and resolves conflicts peacefully if they emerge. Or self-direction: a student stays on task without direct supervision, whether working alone or with others, and does not seem to follow bad examples or succumb to peer pressure. So for each of these categories, what I'm looking at over time, and not just in one lesson, but over a period of time, potentially 4 lessons spaced out over a period of, a month or a couple of months, I'm looking at students and I'm saying, okay, are they respectful? And the scale is a 0, 1, 2, or a 3. So a 0 is they're not respectful any time. They're very disrespectful. 1, they're respectful some of the time. 2, they're respectful most of the time. or 3, they're respectful over the time. Now, this enables us to build a picture of that student's ability to be respectful, or their participation, or their effort, or their self-direction, or their caring. And you can see, for example, in that participation column there, Allison at the top, in the first lesson, she was participating perfectly all the time, trying every activity and taking on various roles. Lesson 3 and 4, she was perfect. Lesson 2, she was a 1. Now, if I'm assessing that student only once against that criteria and only on that day, where maybe she was having a bad day, my assessment of that student would be vastly different from their actual performance. That's why it's important to assess over time and assess, a variety of different times and experiences so we can get a better picture of those students, because every student has a bad day, even if that's about their respect or their ability to be self-directed. But using a tool like this over time can help you build up some patterns and understand, where students maybe are having difficulties with their behavior in certain areas, not just, this kid is causing me trouble and I'm having difficulty with this kid and I don't know what to do, but actually looking for some specific indicators of their behavior that helps you as a teacher know how to help that student, but also helps you to have some data to back up some of the conversations and difficult conversations that maybe you need to have with parents. So as we look at all of these different tools that I've shown you, let's go back to that definition of physical literacy being the motivation, confidence, physical competence, knowledge and understanding to value and take responsibility and engagement in physical activities for life. Now, all of the tools that I've shown you, from the Play Self tool, the Quick Look assessment tool, the fundamental movement skill cards, the game performance assessment instrument, team sport assessment protocol, the game maps, the pass maps, the participation motivation questionnaire, or the responsible behavior assessment. All of these assessment tools help us assess not just the physical, but the affective, the cognitive, and the behavioral aspects of physical literacy. All of these tools can be used as a teacher, or some of them can be used as peer assessments, but all of these tools help us collect data and help us back up some of those assumptions that we're making about students, or some of those judgments that we're making about students and their ability to be successful in our physical education programs. We go back to that quote that I shared earlier, and that compared with other subjects, PE has traditionally been relatively data poor. And as I said, this is not due to the lack of learning that's taken place, because some fantastic learning takes place in physical education. But we've had an absence of effective strategies for capturing the learning that is taking place. And I hope some of the tools and strategies that I've shared with you as part of this webinar can help you start to collect a little bit more data in your program and help you to show some of the amazing learning that is taking place within your physical education classes. So let's go back to those critical questions that I asked you before at the start. Think about what you assess now, and maybe after this webinar, what you'll do differently. How you assess it. How you assess now, and how you may assess in the future with what you've learned. When you assess, and whether you're assessing enough, or do you need to assess more. And hopefully you'll see that some of these tools can make assessment easy for you. It doesn't have to be a difficult thing. It doesn't have to be creating and recreating things all the time. You can use some of these tools that already exist to help you gather data for your students. It might also ask you to question why you assess some of the things you do, and maybe throw some of those things away. If you're assessing things for the sake of assessing them because you've always done it, but you don't know why, maybe consider that. And then think about how all of those things affect the way that you grade and how you use that data to inform your students against the curriculum that you teach. So I hope that this webinar and the tools and strategies that I've shared with you have resonated with you. And if you have questions, or you agree or disagree with anything that I've said, or you want more information, then I really encourage you to reach out to me. You can see all of my contact details on the right hand side there. You can reach out to me through social media or via my email. And all of the tools that I've shared with you, and all of the things that you've seen today are available online. You can access them through iPhys-Ed.com or the Phys-Ed library to help you get started with your assessment journey. So as I said, the main and best place to go would be the Phys-Ed library, which houses all of the resources and all of my resources and online courses and games and everything that I've created as a PE teacher over the years. So if you head to library.iPhys-Ed.com, you can access all of those things. I want to thank you so much for taking your time to watch this as part of the PHE Canada Virtual Conference for 2022. Thank you so much for your support and for making it this far into the webinar. And as I said, if you have any questions or if there's anything that I've said that has piqued some interest in you, then please feel free to reach out to me either on social media or via my email, and I'd be more than happy to connect with you. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the conference.